I want to talk to you for about the next, we'll see, 40, 45 minutes, an hour, 10 hours. I don't know. We'll see about repair for equity deals, which are something that I have been doing for many years, measured in decades. Let me say it that way. I've probably done 300 to 400 different properties using these deals. It was one of the earliest strategies that I ever did because when I first got into the real estate market, we were still kind of in a slump at that time. You know, the market does go up and down, and we were in we weren't like at the bottom or anything, but we were coming back out of a slump. And this was a kind of deal that I learned how to do very early on and did a lot of these because they were in extremely high demand in that time period when we had a recession and a lot of people had job interruptions and a lot of people were not bankable, by which I mean they couldn't go to the bank and get a loan. And it's something I've continued to do over the years, but it is a particularly good strategy when the market slows down and there are people who would like to buy a house who cannot do it kind of the full-on traditional way. So we're going to cover in the next hour. It is a little challenging to give you a really good picture of kind of what you're going to need to know and do to do this in an hour, but you know, this is what we have. So we're going to talk about what they are, why they are a super duper powerful exit strategy, and again, particularly when the economy is kind of economically challenged. I've used it. I've been using it. I've probably done 60 of these in the last 5 years, 7 years. So it works as markets are going up too, but in economically challenged markets, the deals are easier to find in the first place, and there are even more motivated buyers for them. And then we're going to do kind of a high-level overview of how to do it right. Okay, how do you do these deals right? So let's just start at the beginning. For those of you who have not heard this term before, or maybe you have heard of the strategy, but you've heard it called something different than repair for equity. It's repair for equity is an exit strategy. This is not a way that you buy a property. This is a way that you sell a property. Now, if you fit the profile of the buyer that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, it could be a way for you to buy your personal home. But I'm talking to you investor to investor here. I'm talking to you as somebody who's looking for ways of making money off of properties while also being ethical and a benefit for your community. It's an exit strategy where you're working primarily with single family homes that are on the uglyish side. They're not properties that have been fire damaged. They're not properties that have a big hole in the roof. They're not properties where the furnace is gone. They have to be what we call ugly but livable, and I'll explain more what that means in a little bit. But they are definitely not fixed up properties. And you sell them not for cash like you would if you were wholesaling, but rather on terms. You agree to take payments on the property over time, and you're selling them not to investors, but to what I call handy homeowners. And I'll describe more what a handy homeowner looks like as we go on here. When you do this, if you're doing it right, you get enormous returns. I'm talking it's common to see returns in this strategy of 20, 30, 40%. Like if I'm not getting 20%, I'm not doing the deal. If you financed the property that you bought, in other words, you got owner financing, you borrowed private money, something like that, so that you don't actually have any of your own cash in the underlying property, obviously those returns can become infinite, right? If you put no money in and get no money out, that's called an infinite return. They're very low hassle deals if done right. they're very low hassle deals. You kind of you find the deal, you close it, you put it on the market, you find the right buyer, and then you just kind of sit back and collect checks for the next 7, 10, 15, 20 years. And it also has the nice advantage of it turns people who never thought they could become homeowners into homeowners. People who have been renting and expect to continue to rent because they know they don't meet the qualifications that it takes to buy a house by going to the bank and getting a mortgage. And this is life-changing for these buyers. If they do what they're supposed to do and you do what you're supposed to do, they end up, after however long the time frame is, and it depends on the property, it depends on the price of the property. They end up in somewhere between 10 and maybe 20 years. I'm back. Okay. So you can't underestimate the power that this has on other people's lives. Instead of paying rent for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever the time frame is, they're making a payment that will ultimately end with them owning the property. And I have worked with many people that they were the first person in their family who ever owned their own home. And that's personal wealth building, right? I mean, something like 70% of Americans, the majority of their personal wealth is in their home. It's in the fact that they own a home. So being able to do that for people who wouldn't normally be able to do it is a very cool thing. Now, personally, I have a lot of things that I could do with an ugly house. And the reason that Repair for Equity is at the top of my list when it's the right kind of property. They're not every ugly house fits this strategy, but when it does, I can always sell it at a much higher price than taking that same deal and selling it to a real estate investor. I can do it with much less work, like rehab and expense, than if I took that same deal and rehabbed it for resale to a qualified homeowner. And they also come with a lot less management and maintenance than if I took that same property, fixed it up, and rented it. So that, and knowing that I've had this effect on people's lives over the years where they make payments for 10 years and then I hand them a deed to a house, and having some of them literally cry when that happens, it makes it one of my very favorite exit strategies. So let's talk about some things that would clue you in that you had done a good, successful Repair for Equity deal. The first thing is you need to pick the right properties. And the right properties are, it's a combination of, is it in the right area? Is it in the right price range? Did you buy it right? Is it in the right condition? All of those sorts of things. So let's walk through an example of what would be a right property. This house, which is here in Cincinnati, is an 8-room, 5-bedroom, 2-bath, big old house. It's in a neighborhood that we call type 3, right? It's a bread and butter neighborhood, a starter home neighborhood, whatever your term for that is. It's a neighborhood that it's about half rentals and half homeowners, and the homeowners are kind of starters, right? They're people who this is probably their first house. It's the one they can afford for a first house. So, these are not houses with pools in the backyard. They're not, and this is in Covedale, by the way, for those of you who are from Cincinnati. They don't have 5-acre lots. They're modest houses, but they're in a neighborhood that's pretty well kept up. The after repaired value of this property is around $150,000, and it has the advantage of being in the right condition as well. Now, let me start by telling you what was right with this house, and then we'll talk about what needs to be right with every house you do repair for equity. And then we'll talk about what can be wrong with it and it still be a really successful deal for both you and your buyer. So this house had a pretty significant, at least exterior rehab about 10 years ago. It got new siding, it got new windows, it got a new roof, it got a new porch. This thing here, if you're looking at your screen, this is some sort of a thing with the photo. There's actually nothing wrong with that porch railing. It looks really good from the outside. It also has a 2-car detached garage, which, I mean, that's something that people want, right? And it's really rare in this neighborhood. In this neighborhood, most of the garages are 1 car and they are built in underneath the house, so you can't really even get a car into them. So from that perspective, really, you know, that's a big bonus. And it's one of these old houses that you walk in and you're like, oh wow, look at that hardwood, look at that wood, natural wood trim, look at there's stained glass on the, you can't see it because it's on the side, but there's a stained glass window in there. So it's a charming house, high ceilings, fireplace in the living room, you know, good stuff about it. Now, just to give you some perspective on what we're going to do next, had I bought this house, fixed it up, and rented it, it would rent for at least $1,200 a month, and I think probably $1,295 with very little problem. I mean, it's a big house. It's got a lot of room. It's got that 2-car garage. So it's a $1,200 a month rental, but only if you fix up the house first. Okay. So let's talk about what all repair for equity deals must have. If you're thinking through deals you've looked at recently or deals you're looking at now, or maybe even one of your own rental properties that you're saying, maybe I want to do this with it instead, they have to be livable. They have to be in a condition that somebody can live there safely. So working roof and gutters, working kitchens and baths, no major structural issues. It's got to have working plumbing, working wiring, working HVAC. So the stuff that keeps you dry and warm and able to wash things, right? All of that stuff needs to work before you put it up on the market, repair for equity. But at the same time, it can be, and usually is, if it's not ugly, it's not really a work for equity deal. Ugly can mean a lot of things, of course. Outdated. It could need paint, you know, could need wall coverings, flooring, landscaping. The kitchen has to be functional. It doesn't have to be pretty. The baths have to be functional. They don't have to be pretty. So these are some interior pictures from this house. Okay, you saw how, you know, you're looking at the outside and you're like, how is this repair for equity? It looks pretty good. Well, it wasn't until you went to the inside that you started to see why it was repair for equity. So this is one of the 2 baths. It works. I mean, everything's here. It's got a shower and a sink and a medicine cabinet, but it sure isn't pretty, is it? Like this is plywood on the floor. There's no tile, there's no linoleum. Shower works. Do I love this shower surround for $150,000 house? No, I do not. And then we've got the pink walls with the wallpaper border up here, so that's very 1970s, right? The living room, this is a picture of the living room. Perfectly solid, fine, functional living room. It's got, you know, you see the new windows here, right? It's got heat, you know, it's got a boiler with radiators. It's got, you know, electric that works, but the trim is all missing from around the windows and doors, and the floor needs to be refinished, and the room is orange. That is not a function of the camera, that it actually is orange. And you'll notice that some of the outlet covers are actually missing which none of which is any really big deal, right? You can paint a room in a day. A half decent carpenter can hang trim in a day. Outlet covers take 15 minutes to put on. This is one of the bedrooms. So big bedroom, which people do like, right? But it's got this huge closet with nice drawers and hangers and shelves, but no closet doors. None to be found in the whole house. The wallpaper needs to be finished being scraped off. Some of it has been, and the walls painted, and the floor needs to be refinished or carpeted. So what we're looking at here is all work that an experienced rehabber or contractor can do pretty easily and relatively quickly. This work might scare you if you've never lived in a house that needed work or you've never done a rehab. But somebody who is a professional contractor, and I don't even care, they don't even have to be painters and floor refinishers. If they're carpenters, they look at that work and they go, I could have that room done in 2 days. I could have that room done in 3 days. The bathroom's probably going to take me a couple of weeks, but there's a second bath. So if I have to tear this one up, then, we still have the second bath to work with. The important thing, and write this down if you're taking notes, is that the work needs to be such that they can do most of it while they are living in the property, because your typical buyer is going to live in the property while he does it. He can't afford to keep his $1,200 a month rental that he's living in and also be paying the payment on this house while he takes 6 months to fix it up. He's going to live there and work on it at the same time. And that's why it is so important that it be livable. And some of us have lived in rehab zones, me for a lot of my life, in fact. And it's not the funnest thing in the world, but it's very doable. You move all your living room furniture into the dining room while you're doing the living room. And then you move all the dining room furniture into the living room while you're doing the dining room. And it's a very doable thing for people who know how to do work. Now, of course, it's also important, and this isn't really the focus of the discussion tonight, but it's also important that the deal you made when you bought the house makes sense. I mean, that's true all the time. It doesn't matter what you're going to do with the property. The deal you got needs to make sense for the deal to make money, right? So just to give you some background, we paid $28,000 for this house. It was a short sale, by the way. The lady actually owed $79 or something. She owed way, way, way more than we ended up paying for it because we did a short sale, which you're going to learn about next. And we financed it. The way we paid for it was we got a private lender who put up the whole amount of money, the whole $28,000 at 8% interest. And that was a 5-year fully amortizing loan. What that means is we made the same payment, or we're still making the payment, $509.88 a month. And in 60 months, it completely pays off. There's no balloon, because $509.88 will actually pay off a $28,000 loan over 5 years. So that's some background for later on when we start talking about what's next. So here's the thing. If you know me, you know I like wholesaling. And this property would have easily wholesaled for $40,000. That was actually under consideration for a minute until I looked at it and said, nope, this is a great repair for equity deal. We could have just found a rehabber, assigned our contract, we would have made $12,000 and moved on to the next deal, and whatever, this one would have been gone forever. I am telling you that what I did with it is better than that. If you think $12,000 sounds really good, this is better than that. You're going to know that you have done a repair for equity deal right when you price the deal. Now, I'm talking now about selling it. I'm talking about what are the terms under which you're going to sell it. You price it in a way that is very, very attractive to the right kinds of buyers and that make it a good deal for you and for them as well. So in this case, that pricing was as follows. The house is $87,900. You can buy it with $2,900 down at 8% interest with total principal, interest, taxes, and insurance payments. So this is your whole payment of $825 a month for 20 years. And if you make that payment every month for 20 years, you own the house. Now, it could go up or down a little depending on what real estate taxes and the insurance do. But the underlying $710 a month, which is the principal and interest, that never changes for the whole 20 years. You know what your payment's going to be within a few dollars over time. And let me point out that that is $400 less than renting the same property. So if we fixed it and rented it, the payment would be $1,200. If you'll take it as is and you fix it, your payment is going to be $825. If we rent it to you for $1,200, there's no guarantee that that's not going to be $1,300 next year and $1,400 the year after that. Depends on what rents do, right? I control that. As the buyer, it's really good to save $400 a month over renting the same property, because if you weren't buying this property, you'd be renting it. If you need a 5-bedroom house, you need a 5-bedroom house. You'd be renting this property or something very much like it. And to know that your payment is not going to vary a whole lot over the course of that 20 years. So price it right and then advertise the deal that you have. You put it out on Craigslist, you put it out on Zillow, you know, we found bandit signs to be really effective for selling these deals. If you're doing it right, you can expect 100 to 200 calls for every single property you put on the market. If you're not getting that many calls, either you got to price wrong or you're not advertising it enough. The last property that we sold, RepairForEquity, I happen to have the call log for that because we were using a different phone number because it was in another state, and we were trying to kind of track the results of some different stuff, and we got over 150 phone calls on that one deal. We probably got 60 of those after we had sold it. People were still calling us about it. The goal of getting 100 good leads is not so that you can talk to 100 people. We do not talk to every person who calls about a deal, because if you've ever done one of these deals, you know there's a huge number of people who won't read the ad, who think that what you're renting is a fixed up 5-bedroom house for $825 a month and that you're just stupid or something. And they call, and then you have to have this whole conversation with them about how they're supposed to fix it, and then they get mad and say, why would I fix your house? And you say, no, you don't understand, it's going to be your house. And you got to have systems in place with voicemails that people have to listen to first, and scripts where they won't read but they will listen. So scripts about what to say to them to make sure that the people who are misunderstanding what's happening hang up, right? From those hundreds of calls, you should really probably only end up talking to 20 to 30 people to pick the right buyer for the property. So what does that person look like? Well, he is a handy homeowner, which does not mean he watches too much HGTV and thinks he can learn how to fix properties by moving into this house. That is a recipe for disaster. It's not somebody who has a father, brother, brother-in-law, whatever, who promises to fix the house for them for free. That like the person living there themselves has to have the skills, or whatever skills they don't have, they have to know people and be able to compensate them to do that work. Most of our folks do 95% of the work themselves, but if there's something that they can't do, like every time I try and refinish the floor, I mess it up. They're generally in the contracting business, so they know people who do that work, and they make whatever trades they make. You know, hey buddy, come over on Saturday and let's refinish my floors, and I'll give you a 6-pack, and then I'll owe you a paint job. Yeah, whatever deal it is that they make. So they have to have the proven skill and ability to do good work. on the property. Obviously, they have to have the income to afford the payment. Now, our requirements for income on these deals is a little different than rentals. On rentals, we're looking for somebody who's making 3 times the rent payment. On these, we're looking for somebody who's making 4 times the rent payment. Why is that? Well, A, they need to have excess money because they're going to need to buy some materials. They're going to do the work themselves, but they've just got to go buy paint, right? So they have to have some room in their budget to do that. And the second reason is we're trying to avoid buyers who are just after getting the lower payment and are not actually after buying the house. They just want to live someplace for $825 a month and they don't care what it looks like. So we qualify them as if they needed to qualify for the fixed up rented house, not as if they needed to, not as if $825 were rent. So it'll be 4 times the monthly payment instead of 3 times the monthly payment that they need to earn. They also have the usual qualifications that you look for in a tenant, right? You don't like to see people that move every 6 months. You don't like to see people who get thrown out of houses every 6 months. You don't like to see people that their prior landlord says, oh, thank God they're leaving. They've, it's been nothing but police calls and shootings at this house ever since they moved in. You'd like to see they've had some time on the job or at least in the same profession. So let's turn our attention for a minute to what is in it for these buyers. Why do so many people pick up the phone and call about these deals? Why are there so many folks who want it? Really more people who want them than who can possibly get them, because there just aren't enough of them around. There aren't enough people doing them. They like that the property can be lived in while they're doing the work. They don't have any issues doing the work. They know how to do it. They're willing to do it. It's probably what they do for a living, but they like that they can live in the house and fix it up at the same time. They like that they can put a little bit of money up front, and how much depends on the price of the house and how much work it needs. But somewhere between, I've even taken 2% up front on properties. So 2 to 10% down, and then they can pay the rest over time. They obviously like it that their monthly payment is less than rent. Now, this was kind of an extreme example. Most of the time, the payment ends up being about $200 below rent, not $400 below rent. But there's logic to the pricing. But one thing you must look at is, have I set up a deal where I'm attracting this person that I want, who's going to fix up this house, by making their payments easy? And $150 a month discount over what the property would rent for if it were fixed up seems to be kind of the minimum discount that really gets people's attention. They love that, at least the way I do these deals, they never have to go to the bank and get a loan. They make X number of equal payments, and then they get the deed to the property. So, a lot of lease options out there, and I don't have any objection to lease options. I really prefer a land contract or a mortgage and note, depending on where you live, for deals, especially that need a lot of work. The problem with the lease option is they can do the work and then still not be bankable. Whatever it is that's keeping them from being bankable, whether it's their credit, it's not going to be their income, because your income requirements are about the same as the bank's going to be, but it could be liens that they have, judgments that they have, things that you're going to care a lot less about than a bank does. So they do all the work. It's 3 years later, they're supposed to go buy the house by getting a bank loan, and they still can't get a bank loan. That's really frustrating, isn't it? That I put all that effort in and some materials money into a house and not be able to buy it. So with the way I do these, they never have to go to the bank. Now they still can. I'm not going to stop them from going to the bank if they want to go refinance out my 8% financing at what can they get now, 3.5%, but they don't have to if they don't want to. And usually, and again, it depends on the price of the house, you can set up the payments so that they are $150 less than the rent the house would normally command. And the loan, it's not really a loan, it's an installment sale, but the installment sale pays off over 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, not 30 years. You'd be surprised at how many of these folks that I work with will say early on in our conversation, so wait a minute, you're telling me that if I make all these payments, I'm going to own my house in 15 years? And I say, yep, that's right. And they say, well, my mom has lived in her house for 27 years and she still doesn't have it paid off. So they really like that. They really like the shorter amortization periods, and they like the fact that their payments don't go up except as taxes and insurance do for the whole time. And you'll notice that the way I set the price on this house, it's a $150,000 house. We sold it for $87,900. That if they do the work that the property needs, they get the equity. They get all that equity above, call it $90,000. So if they, over the course of a couple of years, they buy $10,000 worth of materials, do all the work, they're in the deal for $100 and it's worth $150. That's why these are called repair for equity deals, because they can repair them and they get the equity, not you. So, boy, it sounds great for them. What's in this deal for you? Well, let's see. $2,900 up front, a net of $170 a month in profit for the first 5 years. Now, what's the big deal about the first 5 years? Remember, I have a 5-year loan on this, so I'm bringing in $700 and something in principal and interest, and I'm paying out $500 and something in principal and interest. So that's $170 a month, but think about this: no maintenance, no management, no repairs. Would you be happy with $170 a month on, say, 20 of those? And then after the 5 years is up and I've paid off that underlying loan, then the entire principal and interest payment comes to me. So assuming that they go the whole 20 years and don't refinance and just cash me out, that's another 15 years worth of $685 payments, which is $123,000 more dollars. And let's recall, I paid $28,000 for this house, and have the potential here to collect $133,000 pretty passively over the next 20 years. So here's a question for you. I said earlier, this house would have wholesaled to a real estate investor for $40,000. I sold it for more than double that. And that's really common, by the way. But when you work out what could I wholesale it for versus what could I repair for equity it for and still make it a good deal for the homeowner, it's a number that's double or more. So like, what's going on with these home buyers? You got to take yourself out of your little investor pod and put yourself into a home buyer pod for a minute and say, why do home buyers buy houses? I mean, an investor's motive in buying this house would be fix it up and sell it within 6 months. So the only thing they're getting out of it is whatever check net comes out after 6 months. That's not the home buyer's motive. The home buyer's motive is to have a house to live in. And if you're picking the right houses in the right area, you're very often finding that the people who want it most are people who have lived in that area their entire life. Their mom lives there, their kids go to school there, they can point to the house they grew up in that's 5 blocks away. They are people in the community who have been renting in the community and want to stay there their whole lives. So it's a very different set of it's a very different thought process about what's a good deal to me. If I'm an investor, I'm going to sell it in 6 months. I got to get it super cheap. If I'm a homeowner and I want to stay there for my whole life, I got to get it cheap enough that I feel like I'm being compensated for my work. But since I'm not going to resell it, that's all just equity anyway. It's not like money in my pocket because I'm not selling it. The fact that you're willing to take payments always increases the value of anything, right? You as an investor are willing to pay more when someone agrees to take payments from you, and the same thing applies to homeowners. You made the payment easy, almost certainly less than their current rent. And again, these folks are not people who they're not people whose other option is, I'm going to go to the bank and buy this house. They're people whose other option is, I'm going to keep paying $1,200 a month rent for the rest of my life, as near as I can tell. Common issues that we see with our buyers. Why can they not get a loan? They have work that's sporadic. It makes them plenty of money, but they don't work when there's snow on the ground because they're roofers. They have work that is paid out in cash. They're like subcontractors, and they make a lot of their money in cash, and they can prove it. They can show you the bank receipts, but they're not filing income taxes and saying that they made this money. So what does the bank want to see? They want to see income tax forms, right? It's weirdly common with these folks that they just straight up have not filed taxes for 5-6 years in a row, and we always tell them, you kind of need to go back and do that, because eventually the IRS is in fact going to catch up with you, and you need to get that taken care of. But if you don't have tax returns, you are not getting a loan from a bank. So we're trying to figure out how we get to the end of this and feel like we've done it right. You've done it right if you correctly documented the deal. Guess what? There's paperwork here. There's got to be something that says, here is what we have agreed to, and here's what happens if you don't do your piece, and here's what happens if I don't do my piece as the seller. And that has to be all, legally drafted by a local attorney. It's got to be correct. It's got to be accurate. That could be one of 3 different kinds of documents. It could be a lease option. It could be a land contract, or what's called a contract for deed, or it could be a mortgage and a note. And I'm going to talk in a minute about how you would decide which one of. It's not a random choice. It's not, oh, I'll do a lease option on this one and a mortgage and note on that one. It's not random at all. The other part of correctly documenting the deal, and this is something that I just learned from the experience of doing 400 of these over a quarter of a century, is that you need to have really good, complete written disclosures to the buyer where they sign off that they understand exactly what it is they are agreeing to. Because sometimes people get so excited about these deals that they don't read the contracts. They don't pay attention to the fine print. So we actually make them sit down and go through a detailed disclosure that says, I understand that I am buying this house, not renting it, and that I am going to be responsible for all repairs and maintenance that come up during my entire ownership, not just what I see right now, but also other stuff, because the roof's good now, but chances are sometime in the next 20 years, it's going to need a new roof, right? It says, I understand that if I don't make my payments, I am going to end up losing my right to occupy the house, and also any and all work that I've put into it. So you want to get this in front of people and get them to sign it, because if they walk out, like if you've gotten all the way to closing, you've screened them, you've talked to them, you're sitting down at the closing, you're going through this disclosure, and they say, well, I didn't know that. And you say, well, we did talk about it before, but now that you know it, would you like to discuss it? And they say, well, I'm not agreeing to that. Well, that's the right time for that to happen. not 6 months after they move in, right? You want to make sure that they don't just believe it's a good deal, but they understand what the deal is. So in terms of like, what contract do you use? Like all great real estate questions, the answer is it depends. And what it depends on in this case is partly the price of the house. The houses that are over about $90,000 to $100,000 in sale price. I'm not talking about what they're worth fixed up. I'm saying what you're selling it for. If it's over about $90,000 to $100,000, and especially if it's in an area that has very high real estate taxes. If you live in New Jersey, you know what I'm talking about. Heck, if you live in Forest Park, you know what I'm talking about. You and the buyer both might find it more advantageous to do a lease option, because that's the only way you can get the payments down to under $150 under rent and still amortize the thing in less than 30 years. Part of it depends on the laws where you live. Here in Ohio, land contracts have some real advantages. In Indiana, land contracts have some real advantages. In Kentucky, they have no advantages whatsoever over a mortgage and a note. So in Kentucky, you might choose to either go the route of the lease option or the mortgage and note. It depends on how qualified the buyer is. If they're like super qualified, you would be more inclined to give them a mortgage or a land contract or something that might require a little more time to get them out if they did not pay. And if they're kind of on the edge, you might say, well, let's try this on a lease option for a couple of years. And if you do the work and make your payments, then we will go over to the land contract or the mortgage and note. And then finally, whether or not you can comply with Dodd-Frank. Boy, 44 minutes in, seems like a strange time to bring up Dodd-Frank, because we could spend another hour just talking about Dodd-Frank regulations and nothing else. Anyone can comply with Dodd-Frank. Whether or not you choose to do that is going to depend on how many of these deals you do. There's actually a rule about if you don't do more than 3 in a rolling 12-month period, it's a lot easier to comply and a lot less expensive to comply. If you get to number 4 in a 12-month period, you have to bring in an RMLO to do a lot of the upfront stuff, and that costs money. And if you're only getting $1,000 up front, it's going to cost you $1,500 to have the mortgage originator deal with it, RLMO, licensed mortgage originator. Anyway, then you might decide to do a lease option on that one instead. So there's a number of things that kind of go into the decision-making process. So let me just kind of give you a graphic here, a visual of what the steps of doing one of these deals are. Okay, it's pretty simple when you sort of see them outlined like this. You go find the deal. You find the right financing for the deal, because remember, you're not wholesaling it. You're going to have to close it. So bring in a partner, bring in a private lender, get financing from the seller, go to the bank. I don't care how you get the financing. Get the deal closed. Figure out, hopefully you figured out back here what the terms of the sale were going to be. So you advertise for the sale. You put out your ads. You put up your bandit signs if you're going to use them. Understanding that bandit signs are illegal pretty much everywhere, but not the one that's in the yard of this property. You get a bunch of calls. You make sure people understand what is happening before you actually talk to them, or you will drive yourself crazy. You screen the buyer. And then when you find the right buyer and you're sure he understands everything and he's all qualified, or she, then you sit down and do the closing and sign whatever the document is, the lease option, the land contract, or the mortgage and note. So let's talk quickly about some things that are what ifs, right? One of the things you're thinking is, what if I do qualify the buyer, I know they can do the work, but they don't do the work? They're just sitting there in that house with that ugly bathroom and that ugly bedroom, and they're making their payments, but they're not doing the work. Well, let's take a step back for a second and say, if they're making their payments, why do you care if they're doing the work? It's their house, not your house. Now, I'll tell you when you do care is when the roof starts leaking and they're not fixing that. Because you always gotta be thinking about, if I get this house back, is it going to be in the same shape, better shape, or worse shape than when I turn it over? And a leaky roof can turn it into worse shape really fast. So you care at the point at which them not doing the work actually starts to affect your security, which is the property. So one thing that you can do is don't take all your buyer's money in down payment. This is another rule I learned. I've had people come to me and say, I can put down $5,000, and I say, and what are you going to use to buy paint and carpet and whatever? And they say, oh well, I guess my tax refund 12 months from now. And I say, okay, let's make the down payment $3,500 and leave you some money, and it's going to make your payment a little bit higher, but let's leave you some money to get the stuff you want to get done in the next week before you move in done. I don't want to take all your materials money. Again, make sure the buyer has really more income than they strictly speaking need to rent the property, and do keep tabs on the condition of the property. I like to stop by these houses every year or two, really 6 months at the beginning, and then every year or two, and just knock on the door and say, hey, I was in the neighborhood, stopping by, seeing how things are going. What'd y'all do to the property? So what if the buyer isn't making their payments, they default on the payments, and they move out, and there's a couple scenarios for this, right? What if they move out having done all the work? What if they're there for 7 years and then they disappear in the middle of the night and you can't find them, and it's clear the house is vacant, so you go in and look around and it's like, oh, well, house is all fixed up, but where's my buyer? Well, that's a good scenario for you, right? Because you default them out of the agreement. You still have to go through a legal process to get possession unless they sign it over to you, which honestly they will most of the time. And you have a better house to sell. Kind of the same situation if they default after having done some of the work. What if they default after having done none of the work, and it's been 7 years and the house is in worse shape than it was before they moved in? Well, that's still not actually awful. I mean, assuming there hasn't been a fire or something. And by the way, you're going to carry insurance, so if there's a fire, you'll be able to get that covered. But 7 years have passed. Property's in theory worth more anyway, right? And you got 7 years worth of payments, and you got to keep their down payment. So assuming you were making those stops by every once in a while and you didn't let it get too horribly bad, that's not your ideal outcome, but it's also not a tragedy. I mean, how many times have you had a rental that has been rented for 7 years and you went back after 7 years when the tenant moved out and it was run down? What if they move after having done bad work or the wrong work? That's really your worst case scenario right there. So the solution to at least these last couple of things is good buyer screening and checking in. I once walked into a land contract house that I had sold, tiny little, probably 850 square foot, 2-bedroom on Chester Road in, I guess that's Springdale. And I did one of those stop bys, and the guy's like, oh, come in, I want to show you what I'm doing. And what he was doing was this is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. He had decided that it would be worth more if he put in another bathroom in his 850 square foot house. So he had framed in like a 6x8 bathroom in his 12 by 13 living room. Framed it in, didn't get any further than that. So I put a quick stop to that. Okay, so what if, 20 years is a long time. What if you decide that you don't want payments anymore and you just rather have cash for the property after all? You don't have to force your buyer into cashing you out. You couldn't do that anyway. You don't have to, wheedle him to refinance, because if you sold it on a land contract or a mortgage, land contracts and mortgages can be sold to other investors without even slightly affecting the person who's living in the house. They keep making the same payments at the same rate. They just make them do a different person. So on this property, this is not something we have done or plan to do. I like this property, but so it's subject to a land contract, right? And we know the interest rate is 8% and that the beginning balance was $85,000 and that it's a 20-year term. Already said all of that. After 3 years of that land contract performing, meaning you've got 3 years worth of evidence saying, yeah, they make all their payments on time and in full, it's easy to sell this property subject to the land contract to somebody who wants to be a passive investor, not interested in being a landlord, not interested in being being a rehabber. And you might have to discount the note, it's not really a note in this case, so that they're getting a 10% return on investment. I actually don't think you would have to, but let's imagine you would have to discount it. Even at a discount that allows for a 10% return on investment, you would still get $69,620 in cash for this property, which all by itself is still more than you would have wholesaled it for. So what has happened at that point, if you did sell the land contract after 3 years, is you collected $2,900 up front, you've collected $8,520 in payments, you've collected $69,620 on the sale of the land contract for a total of $81,000, and what you've paid out, and this is monthly payments to your private lender, is $18,252. Okay, I wanted to leave a minute for questions here. Yeah, I do have a minute for questions. All right, so I think you can see why I love these deals so much and why I've continued to do them for so many years and actually continue to do them even today. I know there's a lot left unsaid here because of the time frame. It takes about 4 hours for me to teach everything you need to know about how to do it right, which properties to pick, which ones to not pick. There's a certain kind of property that, not because of its ugliness, but because of where it is, you don't want to do these on. The logic about how to price them, how do you balance the monthly payments, the upfront payments, the overall price, how to advertise the deals so that you get all these calls. And in 4 hours, I can actually give you the templates and scripts for the ads and for the voicemails that you want to send people through before they talk to you. How to screen the buyers. That is the #1 determining factor about whether you're going to have a good experience or a bad experience in your Repair for Equity deals. I've done it both ways. I've done it the bad way that I was taught, and I've done it the good way that I know now. And it's better to wait a couple of weeks to find the right buyer than to just give it to the first person who seems excited and has the upfront money and makes enough money. How to choose the sale mechanism, like what goes into that. How do I decide whether I want to do a lease option or a land contract, and when would I never do a mortgage, when would I always do a mortgage, and give you the sample forms and disclosures as well, and then also have time to talk about exactly how do you approach it if things are going wrong in the deal. Many of you know I am teaching a class on June 27th. It is 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So it's a half-day workshop on this topic so that I can get into all of that stuff. Yes, we're going to record it. I know somebody's going to say, it can't be there. Is there going to be recordings? And yes, there will be recordings. And yes, you can have access to the recordings, whether you were there in person, which I suggest because then you get to ask questions. But even if you can't attend, of course, you get the recordings. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. You're going to get all the tools you need. I don't have like a next level Repair for Equity course. So this was only 101. Let me tell you about my $50,000 201 class. Actually, my $50,000 201 Repair for Equity class comes with a Repair for Equity deal. You get a Repair for Equity deal free with that $50,000 class. So yeah, you're going to have everything you need to go do these deals. And if you've been following the emails I've been sending out, the price last week was $497, and on Sunday it went up to $697. But we are going to give you guys who did not hear about it before this one more chance to get the early bird price of $497, and that is only going to be until midnight tonight. We've got a coupon code that I'm going to show you in a minute that shuts off at midnight tonight. The way you want to do this is either go to the bit.ly link, Repair for Equity, that is case sensitive. It's exactly like it is written on the screen. Or you can just go to my website, which is alreadygotus.com, and you'll see a picture there that says Repair for Equity, and you can click on that, it gets you the same place. And you need to use the coupon code FOV for Friends of Vina. Okay, Matt, do we have any relevant questions that came up about stuff that maybe I didn't address quickly, or do I need to look at these myself?
Yes, we do.
Give me 3 of them.
Do you advertise these in the for rent or for sale section of Craigslist?
That is a wonderful question. And when I meet somebody who says, you know, I tried those Repair for Equity deals and just nobody ever called on them, I say, where did you advertise it? And they say, well, in the for sale section. That is exactly the wrong place to advertise them. Your best buyers for these deals are people who are already renting in the same neighborhood. So if they're looking to move, where are they looking? Not in the for sale section because they don't think they can buy a house. They're looking in the for rent section. Now you have to be a little careful about how you word the ad, because if it's really clear that this is a sale, somebody will flag it and Craigslist will take it down within an hour. Somebody will say this is in the wrong section and they'll flag it because they're nosy. So it's the for rent section.
How do you verify a potential buyer's capability or skill? I assume they mean in rehab.
Wow. Okay. Well, so one thing is, what do they do for a living? Or did they used to be a contractor or something related to that for a living? The second thing is on the application, which is different than a rental application, you just ask them, like, what work have you done and for whom, and give me their phone number. And then the third thing is more of a, you just, before you sign anything, you just want to walk through the house with these folks and just walk around and kind of go, so, what would you do here? What would you do here? And see if they seem to know what they're talking about. The right person will probably know more about it than you do. Will probably say, well, I mean, I think what would be really good there is some crown molding. I'm just a little worried that these walls aren't completely square, so I'm going to have to borrow my boss's whatever saw in order to do it. I mean, you'll know by the time you've gone through those 3 steps. You'll know. And by the way, they don't have to be contractors. One of the folks that I remember real fondly, he bought the house a long time ago, but he was not a contractor, but for like 35 years, he had been the head of maintenance at a huge nursing facility. So do you think that guy I think that guy's probably done everything, even though he's not officially like a rehabber type contractor? Okay, what else? Last one. Make it a good one.
Can you do a scope of work in your agreement with your buyer? I think they mean a rehab plan.
Yeah, you can. And I used to do that. I used to do these really detailed, here's what you are agreeing to do. But first of all, again, the right buyer knows what they need to do. And secondly, uh, I finally came around to the idea that if it's his house, if he doesn't like my scope of work, he's going to do his own thing anyway. So why am I spending 4 hours doing a scope of work for somebody who's not going to do it anyway?